Hello again. In part 3 of chapter 19, we will talk about the revolutions that occurred in Europe during the fateful year of 1848. This is also about the time that the Communist Manifesto had come out, and many of these ideas are now circulating around in more intellectual circles of the different parts of Europe. And it will topple governments in France, where it begins, Central Europe, and Italy. When the government of King Louis Philippe refused to make changes, the opposition grew and they overthrew the monarchy of France on that date in 1848. A group of moderate and radical Republicans established a provisional government and called for the election by universal male suffrage of a constituent assembly to draw up a new constitution. And they did, and eventually elections for the presidency were held in December 1848, and Charles Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of the famous French ruler, won a resounding victory. But within 4 years, Louis Napoleon makes himself emperor, and he has a dictatorial regime. News of the 1848 revolution in France led to upheaval in Central Europe as well. The Vienna settlement in 1815 had recognized the existence of 38 sovereign states called the German Confederation in what had once been the Holy Roman Empire. And they were in different sizes and shapes, as you'll recall, from the map of Europe that we looked at after the Congress of Vienna. And in that fateful year, cries for change caused many German rulers to promise constitutions, a free press, jury trials, and other liberal reforms. In Prussia, King Frederick William IV agreed to establish a new constitution and to work for a united Germany. This promise of unity reverberated throughout the German states as governments allowed elections by universal male suffrage for deputies to an all-German parliament called the Frankfurt Assembly. Its purpose was to fulfill a liberal and nationalist dream, the preparation of a constitution for a new united Germany. But the assembly failed to achieve its goal. The members had no real means of compelling people to accept this constitution, and German unification in 1848 was not achieved, and the revolution failed. The Austrian Empire needed only the news of the revolution in Paris to erupt in flames in March of 1848. The Austrian Empire was a multinational state containing at least 11 ethnically distinct people, including Germans, Czechs, Magyars or Hungarians, Slovaks, Romanians, Serbians, Italians, vampires, gypsies, Muslims, and the Germans, although they are only a quarter of the population, tended to dominate the Austrian Empire because they were some of the wealthier people who were in positions of authority. And the Hungarians, however, wanted their own legislature. And that's why sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, this part of Europe, the Balkans, is called the powder keg of Europe because of all of these different groups that exist because of the forces of world history. In March, demonstrations in Buda, Prague, and Vienna led to the dismissal of Metternich, the Austrian foreign minister, and he was the arch symbol, as you'll recall, of the conservative order. He flees. In Vienna, revolutionary forces took control of the capital, and they demand a liberal constitution. Hungary was given its own legislature at the time and a separate national army. And here you have some Austrian students plotting their revolution, and there is dissension between all of these different leaders. They cannot agree on what precisely it is that they want to do. And as a result of that, eventually the conservative forces regroup, reorganize, and those military forces will crush the rebels. And it was only really the Russians helped them out a great deal. to put down the Hungarian Revolution in 1849. And these revolutions in Austria fail, as they also do in Italy. The Ottomans are still around, but by the beginning of the 1800s, their authority in that troubled and volatile Balkan region has waned. As a result, European governments, especially those of Russia and Austria, are taking an active interest in the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. And the Eastern Question, as it came to be called, troubled European diplomats throughout the 19th century. And when the Russians invaded the Ottoman provinces of Moldavia and Wallachia, the Ottoman Turks then declared war on Russia. And this gets the other parts of Europe involved in the conflict then. In the following year of 1854, Britain and France, fearful of Russian gains, declared war on Russia. And the Crimean War, as the conflict came to be called, was poorly planned and poorly fought. There were heavy losses that caused the Russians to sue for peace, and by the Treaty of Paris in 1856, Russia agreed to allow Moldavia and Wallachia to be placed under the protection of all of the great powers. The Crimean War destroys the concert of Europe that had kept the peace and the balance of power in the continent of Europe for most of the century. Austria and Russia were the chief powers that were maintaining the status quo, and they're now enemies because Austria had failed to support Russia in the war. Russia was defeated and humiliated by the obvious failure of its armies, and they withdrew from European affairs for the next 2 decades. Britain, disillusioned by its role in the war, the charge of the Light Brigade, Rudyard Kipling. They suffered some serious losses in this fighting. They also pulled back from the continent. Austria, paying the price for its neutrality, was now without friends among the great powers. And this new international situation will open the door for part 4, which is the unification of Italy and Germany.